Hello, everyone. Welcome to another new video of Workers Hammer 2026. Happy New Year to everyone. Happy New Year, Eibhlin.
Happy New Year, Vincent.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Did you have a good break?
Yes, I did have a break, but it seems like a lifetime ago. It
Yeah.
seems a lot has happened since
Yes.
then. So I hardly remember what I was doing. I was in Ireland at Christmas, but it seems like a long time ago.
2026 did start with a bang.
Yes.
You know, right as we were starting to emerge from the bit of the time off, you know, Venezuela happened, Iran is blowing up, Trump is on an offensive, and your party, where is your party exactly?
In the scheme of things, well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But that's a question. Yes. But meanwhile, it's a case of fasten your seatbelts. We're in for a rough ride.
So today, with the first video of the year, we didn't want it to get bogged down in the minutiae of your party. There's leadership elections coming up. We'll certainly mention them a bit later in the video, but we wanted to start with a step back a little bit and have a look at the world in general. Where does Britain fit in it, and then arrive at your party at some point, you know, through this.
Yes.
So that's basically our plan for today. So I guess, you know, what is going on in the world essentially? Like, you know, it seems it's been absolutely hectic and crazy.
Yes.
So basically the year started with President Trump going into Venezuela, kidnapping Maduro, really decapitating the Venezuelan government essentially in a criminal act of imperialist aggression.
Yes.
So if we start with that, I guess a lot of people were shocked by this, and it is shocking in many ways. Although it had been months that the U.S. was building up ships and military assets in the region, but I think it was surprising that they were able to basically kidnap the president without much resistance as well from the army. And a lot of people are wondering, like, well, how is Trump allowed to do this? How come he, you know, what? Like, he can just go into a country, take a president? Like, isn't that, you know, how is he allowed? Why is everybody allowing him to do this?
Yes, I think that one of the most spectacular things about it, the kidnapping of Maduro, is that he got away with it almost unopposed. And I think that's one of the things that we need to talk about, because yes, it's imperialism, red in tooth and claw, no more of the liberal, you know, facade on it. So, but that's a good starting point. Why is Trump getting away with it?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that?
Well, I think Corbyn, for example, went on a few panels and saying, "Oh, this is against international law and it violates international law." And, like, you know, if it wasn't already clear after 2 years or 3 years of genocide in Gaza that international law isn't really worth the paper it's written on, now it should be crystal clear. The left has been for a long time really paralyzed by this idea of international law. What is international law? Let's talk about it for a minute. International law is the law that was set up, essentially the sets of laws that were set up after World War II with the UN Charter, the UN as the institution supposedly you know, mediating conflicts or whatever. But really, it was just the sort of laws and rules set up by the United States for their own domination. Because after World War II, the United States came out of the war really as the dominant, overwhelming, hegemonic imperialist power. So it was their rule. They wrote it. They used it against their enemies. When it was about them, they never applied it. Remember Iraq and Afghanistan? You know, were these not violations of international law? Of course they were. But, you know, who cares? Because they're the policemen of the world. So Trump, basically, what he's doing is he's getting rid of all the liberal pretext that used to sort of cloak imperialism and just going directly for the jugular. And he's been quite clear, you know, we're there for the oil, we're there for the resources, we're there to pillage the country. And this guy was annoying us, so we removed him. That's basically it, you know.
And I think it's also a projection of American imperialist power. It is about power also. It sends a very strong signal to China, which is the ultimate rival of the U.S. as he sees it. That's the, you know, and it comes from American imperialism's sense of weakness, its sense of its own decline. So Trump is aggressively pursuing a policy that could be summed up as America first. what's in America's interest, he's going to do. What's not in America's interest, he's not going to do. And yes, and he's stripping away at all the illusions of the liberal order. So that comes as a bit of a shock.
Yeah, I think with the Venezuela, the kidnapping of Maduro is really that the world isn't governed by international law. It isn't governed by the UN. If that wasn't clear to you, it is governed by force and by great powers imposing their will on other countries. That's made that very clear,
The law in any country, the law in this country, is only as good as the fact that there's a state power there to enforce it.
Yeah.
You have the courts, prison system, arrests, police, and so on. Who's going to enforce international law? It's either the United States, as you mentioned, or it's just a fiction on a piece of paper. So, so much for that.
And then, so obviously, as socialists, we stand for the defense of Venezuela. We stand for the release of Maduro as well.
Yes.
Get him out of there. And we wrote a statement. We can link it in the description.
Yes.
But now, a few days later, Iran exploded. The massive demonstrations against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has long been a foe of the United States in the Middle East. The supporter of the Axis of Resistance. Gave weapons to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to different forces fighting who have been clashing with Israel and the United States. So what is our take on this, essentially? Because there are massive protests. They started out of a very dire economic situation. However, very quickly, Trump and Israel were backing them, encouraging the protest, as Trump is repressing protests inside the United States. They've murdered, ICE murdered someone. There was riots. They're facing brutal repression. All of a sudden, when it comes to Iran, he's all for protesting. So how do we? What does that mean?
He's against killing by Iran, unlike in when Israel is committing genocide in Palestine. This is all true, and the polarization in Iran is between, on the one hand, very legitimate protests against the Islamic regime because the economic situation there is absolutely dire, partly a result of imperialist sanctions.
Yeah, in large part, we have to say.
But those are legitimate. It's not something that's just been dreamed up by the imperialists. And on the other hand, with the backing of the US and Israel, there's the prospect of the Pahlavi regime coming back, the Pahlavi monarchy that was overthrown in 1979, that, by the way, I'm old enough to remember before the Islamic regime was installed in 1978-79, the Pahlavi regime was the most repressive, the most brutal anti-leftist regime almost on the face of the planet. They had a secret police, the Savak, that were as hated and as effective against the left as the Mossad today. So this is not an option. This polarization, that you're forced on the one hand with a monarchy backed by the imperialists or siding with the regime. This is really not an option for communists, but we do insist that the revolution in Iran must be anti-imperialist.
There must be another pole.
There must be another pole that doesn't shy away from standing with the Islamic regime against the imperialists as before, but at the same time has a perspective that they cannot defend the country against imperialism. They have shown that. The policy of wait and see, what is it called?
Strategic patience.
Strategic patience. Yes, I call it wait and see. It, has really emboldened Israel and the U.S. to attack the country. So the resistance has to be based on the working class and based on opposition to imperialism. And it goes without saying, opposition to imperialism in Iran is opposition to the Zionist state of Israel.
Israel,
of course.
I think in the pro-Palestinian movement, a lot of people are quite uneasy about these protests because it's like Iran, has been at least nominally on the side of Palestine, and they see the threat of regime change. And there are even some people who are like, all these protests are like a Zionist conspiracy.
Yes.
Now, obviously that's false, but there are like Mossad agents in those protests. I mean, but like the Mossad is saying so openly, right?
Of course.
So, and some right-wing commentators are like, oh, where are all the pro-Palestinian crowd? Why are they not cheering on those protests? But you can see how there's a bit of an uneasiness here. Although, yes, they're legitimate, but the threat of regime change is there as well. So
Yes.
how do you and a lot of people in the pro-Palestinian movement end up defending the Islamic Republic out
Yes.
of fear of a pro-US, return of the monarchy or a pro-US puppet there.
Yes, and I think it's to be expected under the threat of bombing by the US and by Israel. Some people who do not support the Islamic regime will stand behind the regime under attack from the US. I think that happens. That's normal, but it's not a way forward.
Yeah. Yeah, we
So,
put out an article as well on this. I'll put it in the
yes.
description. So why is Trump so crazy? Like, why is he threatening to bomb Iran, decapitating Venezuela? Now he's talking about seizing Greenland. So
Yes.
the in all Europe is up in arm in defense of Denmark. Kind of agree with him that, like, why is Denmark having a claim on Greenland, but I don't think the US should have a claim as well. Anyway, so why is he so, like, he's really on the offensive? Like, what's behind this in a few words?
Well, he has to shore up American imperialism.
Yeah.
It has gone into decline, and he has decided, no more of the liberal world order, the rules-based order, none of these illusions. So he's shattering a number of illusions. And there's a certain craziness and unpredictable quality to the way he behaves, but there is a logic to it. And I call it America first. That's the
Yeah,
logic.
that's what he calls it too.
That's what he calls it. And I think if you look at that and see how nakedly pursuing the interests of American imperialism without the pretense that we're holding all the world powers together, as has been done since World War II, that gives you kind of a guideline to what is happening. It also shatters some illusions that are very persistent among the European governments, I have to say. So we'll see what happens if he takes Greenland, which he says he's going to take Greenland. So all of this European independence and standing up for another NATO member and so on, we'll see.
Yeah, I think Europe has been quite hysterical since the election of Trump.
Yes.
You have Starmer in Britain, Macron in France, Merz in Germany, and they're all, like, sort of trying to stand up with Trump, but at the same time they need the US. They need the US to stay involved in NATO, because if you take out the US out of NATO, honestly, there's not that much left in terms of muscle. And so they're playing this sort of balancing act, and really what they're doing is they're trying to double down and cling to this sort of liberal order that you mentioned, which Trump is now sort of smashing down. And it creates a situation where those rulers are really totally deluded. They really are doubling down on things that are completely illusory, like the Ukraine war, for example. They're all gun ho about supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US is retreating from Ukraine because they can see that Ukraine is losing the war, that this is a loser, that we have to focus on China, and that we don't really have a reason to maintain a whole war drive against Russia. But meanwhile, in Europe, it's Russia, 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 and the liberals are really doubling down on this. And I think it's I like to call this period we're in now, like, the period where illusions get shattered.
Yeah.
And this really is the delusion of the European leaders. They're going to have a rough hangover, because although they bang their chests and Ukraine, and we're going to go against Russia, and we're going to have the coalition of the willing, the truth is that the European economies, and I very much include Britain in this, they're all weak, they're all stagnating, they're all dependent on the United States. The European armies are all weak, hollowed out. Like, Britain, like, they're kind of funny because they're always talking about deploying troops in Ukraine. They can't deploy troops anywhere without the US.
No.
They need the US because their armies are too weak, the including the British army. Like, okay, they have some numbers. It isn't like, a poor oppressed country or whatever, but they're really hollowed out. And I think it's going to be a rough wake up call for them, probably when the right wing, really sweeps them out of office. You have the AfD in Germany, Le Pen in France, Farage in Britain. this is the Europe of tomorrow, most likely. If things remain like this, it's going to be a rough awakening for the liberals, actually.
Yes, I think that's true. As regards shattering illusions, one of the big illusions among the European governments is the one you mentioned, we're standing up to Trump. Actually, this is nonsense. If you go back to, there used to be an expression back in the day about what the purpose of NATO was. It was to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and Germany down. So that was when Russia referred to the Soviet Union, but it still applies to capitalist Russia today. But what the Europeans are doing, the European governments, Britain, France, Germany, is still to keep the Americans in. And they want to go back to the world order where under the NATO military umbrella, with everybody having massive troops in Europe, massive American bases in Europe, America kept the peace. Trump is not particularly interested in that. He's not interested in Europe. He's trying to pivot towards China and the South Pacific. And, the European governments, not only are they deluded, like Germany, for example, has ruined its own economy.
I know.
For the sake of the Ukraine war. They need, natural gas and fuel from Russia and Ukraine. China is their main market, their manufacturing economy. And look at Britain. What does it have to do with Britain? What you got out of Britain's support for the US in the Ukraine war: higher gas and electricity prices, higher prices for fuel at the pumps, inflation. It peaked in 2022. It came back down again, but still it's there. It hasn't, in a way that it has not been for decades, and wages are not keeping pace with it. So it has everything to do with what happens when you go shopping.
It's been quite good for American Arms Company and American Corporation, because American Corporation get to sell energy to Europe at a much higher price than they used to get it from Russia. And then, Trump is pushing for the rearmament of Europe, pressuring really NATO countries to get 5% of their GDP. Where do you think Europe buy its weapons? Of course, there's a few little companies in Europe, Dassault in France, Swedish companies, but Britain, BAE system and everything. But a lot of it comes from the US. When you buy F-35 jets, you buy them from American military companies.
Yes,
and so that's kind of a good deal for the US, and that's why they're pressuring also those allies to rearm. Yeah.
And I might just add here that if anybody thinks things are going to be different under Nigel Farage, when Reform UK takes over, his criticism of Starmer over Ukraine and NATO is that he's weakening Britain. He's spineless. He's leaving Britain completely defenseless in the face of the need to fight a war against Russia and this, that, and the other thing. So more defense spending, more austerity, and more of the same is what he's promising. This is all in the hope that if they do everything, if the British leaders do everything that Trump wants them to do, everything about Britain will be fine. This is not the case.
Yeah.
This is a complete illusion.
So Britain, like all the other European allies of the US, is really getting squeezed. And we've noted in many other episodes, like what, maintaining membership in NATO, what will it mean? It will mean massive increase in defense spending. And the problem in Britain is they in the current framework of the budget, they don't have any money. They'll have to, of course, there's a lot of rich people who have money, but the government's not going to tax them. But they're going to have to take this money out of elsewhere. The benefit budget, which Labour is desperately trying to find a way to cut, but they're not very good at it. And so, they'll have to do a lot of austerity, actually.
Yes. They will.
So another question also that comes up often when there's a lot of hatred for Starmer. So Starmer is like one of the the most unpopular prime minister in modern history. And people don't just not like him. People hate him. And why is that? Or another question is, what is he doing exactly? What is he, like, the country is not going well, obviously. Nothing really works. Britain is broken. And here he was, in his wish for the new year. He was like, "Oh, this year you will see the good stuff that Labour does, and your life is gonna get better." And everybody is sort of laughing at him. And What are you talking about? So why is that?
He's trying to do what Donald Trump wants him to do, trying to maintain the illusion that Britain actually really matters to the United States. As I explained already, sometimes it does when it helps, when it plays to America's interests. Other times, to quote his press secretary from about a year ago, she told a British reporter, "We don't give a crap about your country." So he's trying to, not antagonize Donald Trump. That's why they raised the defense spending. Trump said, pay more for your defense.
Yeah.
He's trying to not lose everything to Nigel Farage on his right. So he has, clamped down on the working class, on civil liberties, absolutely everything at the same
on
time.
Immigration as well.
On immigration, absolutely.
Mimicking basically Farage,
Mimicking Farage. The restrictions on immigration are really the most dramatic, I think, since the 70s, if not since World War II. And his problem is, the more he does this, the more he loses the support of the people who voted for him.
Of course.
So he has broken all the promises that made him popular with the traditional Labour voters. And at the same time, now he's under attack from the right because he has done no fewer than 13 U-turns. He is, every time he tries to do something dramatic that will, I guess, make Britain great again and make Starmer popular again, he has to back down because this is making the problem worse. So he's a lame duck, and he can neither go forwards nor backwards. And the problem is the one you described with the economy. There is no way to make the British economy really grow, to increase the productivity, the productive forces. That's just not happening.
Well, there would be ways, but again, he's kind of stuck, You could massively cut benefits, privatize more the NHS, try to find some room for growth in the private sector there, but he can't really do this without completely stepping on his base and completely angering the public.
Yes.
But then as a result, he angers the City of London and big business. So then he tries to do a little bit for them, but then he angers everybody. So he's in this balancing act where he does just enough to piss off a certain sector to favor another one, and then does, the same thing on the opposite. And the result is that everybody is annoyed and angry, and nobody's satisfied. And I feel also I had thought that he wouldn't finish the year, Starmer. I thought the budget was going to be terrible. Ended up going a bit better than I expected. But again, it's sort of petering out a little more, he gave a little bit there, a little bit there. There's no plan or anything. It just continues. Mainly also, I think, a bit by inertia, because there isn't a clear replacement. You don't want Nigel Farage in yet. The City of London might be a bit wary of this. But who else in Labour is going to replace him? West Streeting? He's not particularly liked.
Popular.
Who loves West
Not
Streeting?
popular, yes.
Maybe Angela Reiner, but now she was excluded. She's making a bit of a comeback.
She is making a comeback.
So we will see. And it seems the only plan that Labour has is let's get closer to the European Union, reverse Brexit. That seems to be the only desperate thing they have in their pocket, and a few prayers.
Yeah. There's only so far, however, you can get by backpedaling. I mean, the world is going forward, not backwards.
Yes.
And I just think that Starmer is still in office. One of the reasons he's held on is not only the 13 U-turns that I mentioned, but who wants to take over and be in charge of Labour for the May elections, the local elections. You'd have to be totally nuts to want to take that, because obviously it will be a disaster. It's going to be a massacre.
Yeah.
So,
I think those local elections will be important because they will show again things is going to be a disaster for Labour. I think Reform is going to do quite well. Very well, probably.
Yes.
And then it'll test the Green Party and your party as well.
The Green Party and your party, which we will come to.
Which we're coming to slowly. We're getting there. Okay, so we talk Venezuela, Iran, the whole world. Trump is moving on the offensive. The Europeans are completely deluded and soon to be out of the picture. Why does that matter? Because I feel there's a sense in Britain of here are all the crazy things happening in the world. It isn't so far happening here. Not that things are great.
Somewhere
Everybody
else.
knows that catastrophe is on the horizon, but there's a sense a bit of being a bit like, I don't know, sheltered, but like this doesn't impact us directly.
Yes.
So how of all these big geopolitical things we're talking about, how does that impact, everyday working people, or how does that impact the left? People who are trying to fight right now.
Yes. I think that's a very important question because um, one of the main factors among all the craziness is that there is no force that's fighting back against Trump, like you mentioned
Yeah.
in Venezuela. And so all of these crazy things are happening, but it's very easy for the left and the working class in general to feel that you either keep your head down and hope that you escape the worst of it and that Britain escapes the worst of it.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is an illusion. It's
This is
Britain.
not going to happen.
Yeah. Or what? Sorry. What?
Or the alternative is to run around like crazy and try to keep pace with events just by activism, try for the left to try and substitute itself and its own forces for the actual power of the working class, which is what is missing from the picture. So I think it's important to just talk about that for a bit because it's a difficult situation and it's not clear what to do. There's a pull towards passivity and demoralization because I think it is demoralizing that there isn't a force that's counterweight to Trump, or to just run ragged and try to
Headless
chickens, which means effectively trying to prop up the liberal status quo ante, how it was before.
Yeah. I think that's really the defining thing. It's important that I'm glad you mentioned this, the pushback, like how the world works. The US is on an offensive and they will not stop unless they really hit a force able to push back and to really put them into trouble, whether it is the working class at home, in the US or in different countries. This is what we fight for. But even like a military, force, whether it is Iran or China, China has the power to literally paralyze the whole military industrial complex of the US. We've seen it last year with the rare earth minerals.
Yes.
They haven't done anything in Venezuela. They've been basically silent and have basically taken in. So, and I think this is really key. And I think this missing factor of a force saying no also applies very much on the British terrain.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons there isn't a force saying no is because Trump is really steamrolling on all these various left-wing quote unquote forces that dominated the post-Soviet period and have been quite hollowed out, quite weakened, or quite hypnotized by liberal illusions, and he's sort of this tank steamrolling on them. And it's a bit similar in Britain in a certain sense, like the sort of liberal era, starting with Thatcher, who smashed the trade union, then Blair, who really co-opted the leaders of the trade unions into Blairism, really hollowed out the trade unions, hollowed out the left, who also adopted a sort of liberal posture and liberal politics, honestly. And then all of this is getting smashed, and you see how weakened actually the position of the working class is, And so where am I going with this? Like, I guess the two trends that you identify, either you hunker down and tune off out of politics, or either you run around like crazy, are both pulls on activists right now that we must be conscious of and avoid both of these roads.
Yes, I think that's true. And if you think about the impact on the working class itself from the liberal era that you're talking about, this is where the divorce between the left and the working class really happened. So I think that's a very big factor in the polarization. In some ways, is kind of between the left doing the activism, and in the workplace, workers feel like every worker feels like stuff is being done to them all the time. It's a grind. Everything is a grind.
And the only choice you have is to take it.
The only choice you have is to take it, and that the political activity that takes place in the country has nothing to do with them except they look to Farage as something that, a voice against the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
But that separation between the struggles of the left and the situation of the working class, the demoralized situation of the working class, the hollowed out state of the unions, that in itself is a problem.
Yeah.
It just feeds into the situation, I think.
Yeah. I guess just to be conscious of this helps already, because then when you're conscious of this, then you can realize that, like, you cannot, by your sheer will, just change like years and years and years of problems and defeats by your sheer will. So that's the message to those who are running around. Stop running around. Yes, we need them to demonstrate. Yes, we need to continue be active, but we also need to keep a sense of proportion here, because this offensive is gonna continue, for months or maybe years. So we got to be steel ourselves and not lose sight of the big picture here of what's happening.
Yes, I think obviously we need to intervene into the struggles, the protests about Venezuela, about Palestine, and the hunger strikers, and all of these things. But we have to put more effort into what are we intervening on, and not just to be urging more activism and more of the same. There has to be some recognition. For example, with the pro-Palestine movement, well, what's been done so far is not working. And we have to feed into that discussion as well, the point you just made. There is no easy, quick fix for problems that have developed and been allowed to fester over decades, such as the hollowing out of the trade unions. There is work for communists to do in the trade unions.
Of course.
Absolutely. But you have to have a bit of a medium and a long-term view of it, and you have to be patient with it. But the fact that it's difficult, which it is, doesn't mean that the left should just ignore it altogether and run around and be the activists.
Talking about difficult things, I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about the hunger strikers, because that was what was dominating a bit the Christmas period, and still is, constant demonstrations in front of the prison where they are. Now we've learned yesterday that some of the hunger strikers have paused their hunger strikes. One of them, I think, was on day 71 or 2 or 3. Anyway, quite advanced, my feel is that the obviously we are, it's admirable, and they're making a gigantic sacrifice, and it's we've been to some of these protests and support to them, and they deserve our entire support. And my feel is that in the pro-Palestinian movement, that's obviously unanimous, but I feel it's also been it's been difficult, for a lot of activists. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's like every day you're checking, like, are they dead? Are they what's going on with it? Plus, added to this, the huge media blackout. Like, none of the mainstream press is talking about them, or barely, let's say. And it's difficult. And I was wondering if you could. So you went through the Irish hunger strikers in the
1980s.
Yes. And maybe you could, I don't know, speak a bit to why is it so hard, or was it hard like that in the 80s? Was it what's the difference a bit here?
I will make a few points about the similarities and the differences. In fact, recently at a meeting in London about the pro-Palestinian hunger strikers, one of the speakers was Bernadette Devlin from Northern Ireland, who spoke very powerfully. And one thing she said that I totally agree with: of all the things that we went through in Northern Ireland in the 30 years of the Troubles, and that includes Bloody Sunday, massacres by loyalists and so on, the most traumatic was the hunger strikes. 10 people, 10 Republicans died. It is very, very difficult form of struggle. Obviously, there's a huge admiration for the courage, self-sacrifice, and determination, and the fact that they will not back down until there's some concessions by the government. There's no question about that. But there was one of the big differences between Northern Ireland and the Palestinian movement at the moment is that at the hunger strikes, especially when Bobby Sands was still on hunger strike, it galvanized the entire nationalist movement into support of the hunger strikes and Sinn Féin. The surge of support for Sinn Féin was such that they abandoned their long-standing position of not standing in elections for Westminster, and they stood Bobby Sands as a candidate, and he won. It was a huge upsurge of support for the nationalist movement.
Yeah.
This is not what's happening with Palestine. The pro-Palestine movement is at an impasse, and I think part of the motivation for the hunger strikes is simply that the courage and self-sacrifice of the hunger strikers stands in contrast with the impotence of the strategy of the movement, I would say.
I think that's well said. Yeah, because for me, it's been a bit the culmination of how long has it been that we demonstrate for Palestine almost every week, or 2 years or so,
Yes.
even more.
Yes.
And in London or in Britain, we've had huge demonstrations, huge support. Yet the movement was always remained kind of toothless.
Yes.
I often say that, like, in other parts of Europe, you've had trade union actions against Palestine in Italy, in France,
Yes.
in Greece, and other countries, and often they're
Yes.
symbolic, honestly.
Yes.
And you can have many criticism of this. A few
Yes.
hours, it's kind of tokenistic.
Yes.
We haven't even had tokenism from the trade unions in this
No.
country. Zero actions. And what you've seen in the Palestine movement in Britain is that mechanism of class collaboration with the unions and the labor government. And the deal is, it's not written on a paper, but the deal is we'll have the big demos that are not going to do anything, but big demos, and that is it. We're not going to do anything that's going to really put the labor government in a difficult position, because that would require the actions of the trade unions, and all the trade unions support the labor government.
Exactly.
And it's this sort of mechanism that you've seen that has made sure that the movement remained toothless. It's big yet impotent. And now, there was a ceasefire that the government supported. The government said, oh, we recognize a Palestinian state. Like, doesn't matter. It's totally, useless at this point. And media attention died down, and you get into this impasse, I think, where you don't have any more of these big demos, and attention has moved on. And yeah, anyway.
Yes. I think it's, the fact that all of the trade union leaders in the entire country support the Starmer government is the key to understanding why the trade union movement hasn't been involved even in a tokenistic way, and has not supported the hunger strikers. I mean, the hunger strikers are criminalized for, things like spray painting some military hardware, like really trivial things, thrown in prison, not even given due process. And because terrorism is invoked by the government, the trade union leaders just don't touch it particularly. So I think that's part of the impotence of the movement.
So I think understanding this dynamic helps also get out of that just demoralized framework. I think if you put the responsibility at the foot of the leaders of the union movement who had a responsibility to do something and didn't, I think that helps understand what happened with the Palestine movement. And I would also say that it helps understand as well, there's a bit of a growing backlash in the working class against Palestine, which the right fuels, obviously, of like, oh, they talk about Palestine, they never talk about Britain or something. And that also speaks to an issue, because the trade union movement was quite inactive or simply symbolic. There was never a connection made between the conditions of the working class in Britain and Palestine. It remained this sort of moral issues, which the right is exploiting more and more to create a sort of backlash against the left, essentially. Anyways, that's just another point to keep in mind, I think, for the future.
Yes, and I think it's a point also for the left. Like, the job of the left is to make the connection to the working class, to explain to them how Britain's role in the world, Britain's foreign policy, Britain's military policy and military alliances do affect their daily lives and affect the conditions of the working class in Britain. And I think we've made this point before on the podcast. The Zionism has had a direct impact on the British workers' movement. It was Zionism that defeated Jeremy Corbyn and his movement in leading the Labour Party. So it has a day-to-day effect,
Of course.
But these things are not obvious to working class people and to members of the trade unions. And I think that the socialist movement really needs to recognize that this is part of your job. I said there's no short-term quick fix for the situation of the trade unions being hollowed out. But there are plenty of socialists in the trade unions who could do the very basic tasks of explaining those links and, picking up the interests of the working class. There is some truth to what working class people feel, that there's a lot of attention that goes towards issues like Palestine and so on, and not towards the working class here. I think the left has some responsibility towards that and should try to correct it, like make the trade unions in your workplace seem like they can actually defend the workers,
I think it'd be good to do a whole episode on the trade unions and the work also we do, because we're not just talking, we're also involved in certain trade union organizing. But in general, what you feel is, you've mentioned it again, that divide between the working class and the left is really felt in the trade unions, where you have a few leftists in the branch union meeting, completely separated from the mass of workers. Anyway, I'm not gonna get it. We could talk a lot about that, but that's one of the problems.
Episode. Yeah. I think that would be good.
So we talk about the world situation.
Yes.
Nobody is pushing back against Trump. There's not like this pushback. Talk a bit about Britain, sense of sheltering, but also demoralization, this separation between the left and the rest of the country. What's happening and what's being discussed in the left is kind of sometimes not really linked to what's happening in the country. But what about your party, if we get to it? Why is your party not a force really pushing back against the this entire situation, essentially?
It has made itself not very relevant to the developments in the country, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
What's in the news? The surge in support for the Green Party.
Oh yeah. Okay. Let's start with the Green Party.
Let's start with the Green Party.
Yeah. They've been quite efficient, Polanski, with really capturing the sort of radical liberal middle class vote, essentially. And kind of the problem with your party is that they had also banked on this constituency too,
Yes.
and now they don't really have it. So the Green Party is really capturing radical liberal constituency. And by the way, if you're not convinced by this, or you're a socialist in the Green Party, I would recommend go watch the latest episode of Bold Politics, of the podcast of Zach Polanski.
What did you learn from that?
I mean, it's the episode is a vote for Farage is a vote for Putin. And it's this whole very liberal imperialist politics of Brexit was a conspiracy engineered by Putin. We need a EU defense pact to continue the war drive against Russia and prop up Ukraine, and anti-Trump. And it's sort of these liberal politics that are dominant in Europe, in pro-European Union circle Remainers. And really, when we talked about the delusions of the European leaders, this is also a delusion. It's essentially a radical version of Starmerite liberal pro-EU politics. And I believe it's also going to crash quite hard with the world that is moving on and away from this. There's no more space anymore as Europe is getting squeezed. There's no more space for this. And you have these as long as the left remains tied to these kind of politics, the left will be in a lot of trouble, and the working class will turn its back on it, like it's been turning its back for many years already.
Well, from what you described, I haven't listened to that particular podcast. That's Zach Polanski and Carol Cadwalader.
Yeah.
But it also, from what you describe, it also shows the Green Party's utter contempt for the working class. Because listen, if Brexit was just a conspiracy by Putin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that totally denies that the working class hated the European Union and hated the liberal establishment and voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. So what's behind that is, this idea that the working class, especially the white working class, and God forbid, up in the former industrial areas, outside of the M25, are just racist, backward chumps to be completely ignored, which happens to be the view of the City of London. That they are
They're too stupid, you know.
Worthless. They're too stupid.
They buy Putin's
Yes.
propaganda. Bunch of idiots.
Yes.
Like,
Whereas we're all multicultural and we're all for
it's
immigrants
rubbish.
and so on. It's rubbish, and that is so. Also, the way they deal with Nigel Farage is just, these are bad ideas. But what about the fact that the working class is looking to Nigel Farage as an opposition to the establishment, while what they are doing, the Green Party, Zach Polanski, and the Liberals, is defending the Liberal establishment, the Liberal status quo. So it sounds to me like it's a fairly good example of something we've been saying a number of times.
Exactly. So they want to be the radical liberal option.
Yeah.
And really that's only going to push the working class further to the right. But go back to your party. So your party kind of got in a bit of trouble because the Greens are taking a lot of members from it.
Yes.
And so what would be the logical option for your party would be to pivot towards the working class and be quite aggressive against the Green. And also, let's say your party was all good and fine out of that founding conference we had, it would have hit the ground running with a program and an appeal that speaks directly to the working class, that distinguishes itself quite sharply from the Green Party. A lot of people are squeamish. We're supposed to be like all friends. Meanwhile, the Green Party every day is laughing at your party and stealing its members. No. Like, really distinguishes itself from the Green Party, really hit the ground running to already develop at least a basic programmatic proposition, and is already starting to campaign for the May elections, which are going to be important. I know a lot of people don't really care about the local elections, but there'll be a test, these elections, for Labour, for Reform, but also for your party.
Yes.
Now, this isn't what's happening. Your party isn't on the ground running anywhere, or at least maybe in proto branches at the initiative of local members, but that's it. There isn't a program, as we noted. And really, for me, the reason is because the main leaders of your party are busy getting ready for an intra-bureaucratic struggle over who controls the party.
Yes.
And it's Corbyn versus Sultana, right? And basically what that means is that the dynamic inside your party really much does not have much to do with the dynamic in the country.
Yes.
They're sort of two separate worlds.
Yes.
And if you look at the timeline, so there's nomination right now open for the leadership of your party. They're closing, soon. Then there's going to be the internal campaigning. And basically the leadership will be elected and meet for the first time on the last day of February. And still won't have a program, still won't have an idea of what to campaign on. May elections are coming. I'm going to warn activists for your party and I'm one of them. You're one of them as well. It's going probably to be quite a disaster, those May elections.
Yes.
So we better get ready mentally for this, work as much as we can so that it isn't a disaster, but prepare yourself mentally.
Yes. I mean, just on that note, think about who is preparing for the May elections and has been for months is the Green Party.
Yeah.
Also, the independents, all of the independents, Islington independents, almost every London borough has independents. Several do anyway. And your party has not taken the fight to the Greens, but also not to the independents either. They could, rather than appealing to the independents, for example, to join your party and making a fight, which would basically mean making a fight that the party must be based on a program for socialism and for the working class. That's how I think how you would win over the independents. But so they're losing out mainly to the Greens, but also I think to these independents. So yes, it does not look good. In fact, I will just add, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm in Corbyn's constituency. Jeremy Corbyn has been preparing for the local elections for months since last year, not as your party, but as Team Jeremy and working with Islington independents. So, your party is not going to come out of this looking very good.
I think what's happening with a lot of activists in your party is you have exactly those two trends we mentioned. There's a lot of people who have sort of tuned out of it.
Yes.
This is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
F that. And I don't want to hear about it. Or else, what I notice, my WhatsApp is full of messages because I'm on a few WhatsApp groups like to your party. Like a frenzy, absolutely incredible. Like, we go to that picket line and you bring that banner there, and we have an event on this and an event on that, and an event, and this sort of frenzy, which is kind of divorced from what's happening out there, and it becomes quickly an echo chamber. So how do you? Again, like, it's the same sort of two trend. What do you do exactly?
Yes, how to make it relevant. I do sympathize with you about the group chats because seriously, a lot of, you can see there's a lot of effort going in to try to organize these proto branches and so on. And there is, in fact, some political discussion that takes place in there, but it doesn't, insofar as the organized left is involved, they tend to downplay the political issues at the expense of other things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should talk a little bit about the left slate and the actual divisions, what you called an intra-bureaucratic struggle in your party, because that, I think, will help if we understand that, its strengths and weaknesses. I think that'll help to orient people about your party, help to explain what's going on or not going on with it.
I think we should certainly do a whole episode on the elections inside your party. But quickly, if I can just say, Zara Sultana announced her own slate. It's called Grassroots Left.
Yeah.
And we support it with our criticism, which I'll lay it out in a minute. But we think it's important to campaign for that slate.
Yes.
Why? Because it draws a number of key political lines against the Corbyn camp, which has yet to announce, as we are recording this, has yet to announce his own slate, its own platform.
Yes.
It stands against the monarchy, against Zionism, for socialism, against NATO as well, explicitly. Okay, these are all good things. The problem is but it's a bit the problem that the left is facing. It's like the grassroots left platform isn't really a program. And I'll explain why. It's basically a list of demands that are good, that are supportable, that we support, obviously. They're okay. But it's a list of demand. That's what it is. It isn't like a vision for the party tied to what's going on in the country. It doesn't start at a starting point. Here's the crisis that we're facing in Britain. Here's the crisis that the left is facing. We've touched on it a little bit. The left being sort of clinging to the dying liberal order and being isolated from the working class. It doesn't discusses any of these points, and then none of the demands are really geared toward fixing this problem. So if you take the platform of the grassroots left, you won't be able to take this and then go knock on doors for your party, because, well, first of all, 3/4 of it is about internal structures and member-led democracy, which, all right, we've talked about this a lot in previous episode. Yes, of course we're for it, but this isn't the way to really wage a fight both inside your party, but also in the country. You're not going to tell people to vote, that they should vote for your party because, hey, look, we have 50% of the funding that stays in the branches. Like, no. So this is our criticism of the grassroots left. Really, is that it isn't a program in the sense that it isn't a roadmap to solve the challenges facing the party.
Yeah, I think it's useful to just think a bit about what do we mean that it isn't a program, or what is a program. And the demands that they have that are supportable, Britain out of NATO, opposition to Zionism, abolish the monarchy, and so on. Those are good demands. But there's also the question of how do you achieve them? I mean, demands, a program is a vision for a party. They have to be things that you are prepared to fight for. And for that, you have to recognize what the obstacles are. And there is no sense of that with the left wing of your party. And indeed, there's very little effort to really distinguish the platform of the grassroots from the platform of the right wing of the party. I know we haven't seen it yet, but honestly, you would need to read kind of the small print of this to see that it's not Jeremy Corbyn's program. Jeremy Corbyn hasn't said openly Britain should get out of NATO, but everyone knows Corbyn is against NATO.
Yeah, or at least he's not for it.
He's not for it. So it is important that the left doesn't get crushed in these elections, that would be bad for the whole left, because what Zara Sultana represents is also kind of brings together most of the organized British far left, I would say. So it's important to avoid total defeat at the hands of Jeremy Corbyn. But there is a point to the left not having drawn the lessons of the Corbyn era, and it's a problem with the left slate that the refusal to distinguish themselves from Corbyn, and even so, they put Corbyn's name.
I know
on their platform. Piss Corbyn off, naturally he complains he doesn't want to be part of it because there is a left-right division.
Yes.
But the problem,
but it's all murky and confused.
Both Zara Sultana and the organized left is that they will not clarify this. They do everything to obscure it.
That's why it lacks a coherence, because it doesn't start with, here's what Corbyn's vision is. Here's why it won't work. Because basically Corbyn's vision is sort of wishy-washy, liberal, loose alliance that is not angering anyone. Here's why it will not work, and here's what we need instead. They never do this. It's always, they put forward good politics and then always pretend that Corbyn and everybody else agrees with this. And then thus it fuels confusion. A lot of people are like, why can't we just stop this fight? This fight between Corbyn and Sultana, but it isn't going to stop. Because they're fundamentally leaning on different social strata in your party that have different aspirations politically.
And another thing about their platform is that it avoids all the controversial questions. There's a polarization between the Muslims and trans people that came up at the conference.
Before even,
and even before. And so there's not a word about it, about how to bridge that gap. And they've also not, there's nothing explicit about how we're going to take this fight to the Greens. So, and all around every day, there's someone else has defected to the Greens. So it's not, it lacks coherence, and it's not a kind of a battle plan to win these elections.
Well, no, because you have to make your party relevant to the working class. And right now, as you say, people at work are getting crushed. They're getting told to take it. There isn't a force, as we said regarding the grand geopolitics in Britain too. In your workplace, there isn't a force that says, no, we're putting our foot down and we're mobilizing people for a pushback, even on the most minimal basis. I know there are trade unionists here or there, which I'm sure are doing a good job, but overall, the trade unions are extremely hollowed out and led by really bankrupt people who are supporting Starmer. The Green Party is trying to save liberal politics in Britain. And your party, rather than being this force, is really locked into this sort of internal discussion, whose one of the main problem is not related or relatable to people outside of it. So that has to be fixed, and that has to come from the left wing, because I'm sure Corbyn with his sort of wishy-washy politics, might be even more efficient to try to put forward something that is going to work on the doorstep. But it's going to be the same 2017 manifesto, which is proven also to have its own reformist problem. The left has to put forward a truly socialist platform that is successful, that is able to relate to working class people, that is able to give them this pull that's needed, that is going to say no. But you have to get into the reality, and that's the problem with all these demands for members' democracy, this obsession about structure. It has nothing to do with reality. Get in the real world, Like, anyway, we'll do a whole episode where we can even go deeper. I would like maybe to bring this to a close. Maybe we talked a few times about people who are hunkering down, tuning out of politics, and those who are kind of headless chicken going to go activism. Can we just finish on like what would be our message to both these trends? So what do we say to people who are either getting out of your party, I don't want to have anything to do with it, or not just about your party, but also at work, not giving up on trying to build a union or trying to push back against the bosses, or elsewhere, giving up on going at demonstrations? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, um, start by admitting the situation is difficult for leftists and it's difficult for the working class.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a quick fix, but that does not, but one of the huge pressures is to believe that you cannot do anything, especially in the working class and in the unions. This is not true. It is a pressure because in the world geopolitics, there's nobody pushing back against American imperialism and Trump. No country, no real force. And likewise in Britain and within every country, the working class is not really pushing back against the attacks that are coming. So you need to understand that even if a situation is difficult, it's important to try to fight now in a way that is realistic, that will win some small gains, because the situation is going to get worse.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
if you leave it, it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you can do in the trade union, for example, talking to our comrades in the trade unions, what they have been trying to do, and is very patient, important work, is to try and rebuild the unions by making small gains for the working class. People see, oh, the union is actually going to defend me against,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. Trying to get the main workforce to support the cleaners who are marginalized, who are often immigrant workers. There are things like that that can be done. So just to say that it's a difficult situation, doesn't mean you can't do anything. It also does, if you're going to do a lot of running around, and believe me, we do plenty of running around, but you must always consider, what do communists bring to the table in these events? If we're going to Venezuela demonstrations, we're going to Palestine demonstrations, there must be something distinctive that the communists bring to the protests. In other words, on what basis are you building an anti-imperialist movement? On what basis are you appealing to, are you fighting against imperialism? And if you think about that, it will quickly bring you back to the need to reconnect with the working class.
Yeah. So yeah, I think for those who want to give up politics or whatever, it's like big attacks are coming. So better to start digging our trenches.
Yes.
And getting ourselves in the best defensive positions.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do this, because when the wave is going to come, whether it is in the form of a reform government or who knows, in a more even more right-wing Labor Party, it's better to, if we are in a better position, to limit the damages. So you have to get in it, even if it's hard. And again, pace yourself, fix realistic objectives. Keep in mind the situation. You cannot change everything. Every 30 years of rotten baggage by yourself all alone.
Yes.
You can't. Now, on the other hand, and you started to touch on it, those who are running around, stop running around like crazy. Stop the frenzy in the WhatsApp group. You're losing sight of the big picture here.
Yes.
You have to, as I said, you have to pace yourself, because these things are going to get tougher before they get better.
Yes.
And that's just the truth, Doesn't mean we give up, but it means you have to be sober in front of the situation. So yes, we must continue to fight. Yes, we must continue to fight inside your party as well to build it. But we must also choose our battle, steel yourself, take time to read and think about what's going on in the world, what's going on with your party, and not get lost into the what's going on today and tomorrow and this weekend and the demo and this and that and this and that. You're going to get burnt out.
You're going to get burned out. And also, I agree with you completely. And you're going to become very narrow. Part of the difficulty is that you must keep in mind what the big world picture is, the forces that are in it, imperialism and so on, and try to connect it to the day-to-day work. And that takes a lot of thought. It's not such a simple thing. But if you don't do that, you will get sucked in, you will get burned out, and you will become very narrow, narrowly focused on your little area.
Yeah. And bring those discussion with the branches in your party or in your trade union or whatever. Why are things so difficult? How did we get here? Try to broaden it out.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's it.
Do you have anything to add for now?
No, I think we'll come back on some of these other topics. Put in the comments any questions that you have anything that you would like us to discuss or address, we're
Yeah.
very happy. We read all the comments.
Yeah, cool.
So
that's it for us. We'll be back very soon. Hopefully, we'll try to keep Workers Hammer videos regularly.
yes,
because thanks to your support, it is starting to grow a little bit. So we appreciate it very much. So like and subscribe to not miss any future videos. Share them as well. It helps us reach a broader public.
Yeah.
And that's it. Thank
Give us
you.
your comments.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.